Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning. We usually do these in the afternoon. I am Jeevan Sangha, and I am happy to have you guys all here for the Indigenous Self-Determination and Equity in Diabetes webinar today. I'm extremely grateful to be joining you from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the territories of the Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kikite, and Stalo nations. Feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know where you guys are all calling in from today. We have an amazing session ahead of us, and I'm very excited for our two presenters to be here today. So I really encourage everybody to be present. Please turn off your devices and really be taking part in all the activities and this presentation today. If you guys have any questions or comments during the presentation, feel free to pop them into the chat box. We do have a dedicated Q&A portion at the end of this presentation, and we'll get to all the questions then. Without further ado, I would like to invite both of our amazing speakers to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Jeevan. My name is Valerie Bob. I'm Coast Salish, Halkamenem. My English name is Valerie Bob. My Halkamenem name is Salihuia. And I have a picture of my family because I felt like who I am as a person is my family. I have my grandchildren up here, my daughter and my granddaughter, my son and her, my great grandbabies here. And we all live together intentionally as our family units used to live. We followed the Coast Salish Halkamenem culture, which is a language that that is common, has common features with Centrothan, which we'll be talking about today and making reference to. And I wanted to let you know then that my mother was from Idaho. She was a Nez Perce tribal member from the United States. And my parents met as migratory workers in the hop fields of Western Washington. And my mother moved here and started her family here. And so I'm really happy to be here. I have almost done with my work at Simon Fraser University, PhD program in linguistics and music. And I found in my research that a lot of the learning cannot happen if you're not well. And diabetes was probably the first, observed that as a disease is something that a lot of our people are suffering, including my own family, as a barrier to learning our language. And I'll let Tess take over from here, but welcome everyone.
Thank you, Val, and greetings all. I'm very grateful to be here. So thank you to the network for the invitation, and thank you to each of you for taking the time to join us. Val and I have had a really wonderful time connecting and preparing for this session, and we're both so energized and passionate by this topic. So looking forward to share with you all today. I'm going to start by situating and positioning myself a little. So my name is Tessie Harris, and I'm joining you all today from the unceded, traditional, and territories and homelands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm of Scottish and German ancestry and an uninvited guest on these lands. And I recognize that I benefit daily from the gifts and the beauty of these lands and waters and making my home here. And want to honor the people and the communities that steward and live and have always stewarded and lived in relationship with these lands and waters that I'm on. And I also acknowledge that I come to this work from a place of learning and unlearning, and I am by no means an expert on Indigenous health or self-determination. And I don't have lived experience of being Indigenous or living with diabetes. So I really try my best to come to this work with humility and curiosity and the acknowledgement that it's an honor to be part of it and to work together towards changes. So I'm really grateful in advance to Val and to hopefully some of you for what I learned today in this session. And in my current role as a diabetes educator with the First Nations Health Authority, and in the past years of working alongside Indigenous communities, I've had the immense privilege of hearing many stories from communities and families and individuals, stories that highlight some of the barriers that people are facing and the challenges that exist in accessing services around diabetes, which we hope to explore with you today. And also many joyful and hopeful stories of people finding their path to wellness, or communities that are coming together in the spirit of mutual support and strength to navigate diabetes. So, and I reflect often on my positionality as white and educated and able-bodied person, and my role in this work, and navigating that tension there of how to meaningfully support change and practice allyship, but also knowing how and when to get out of the way. So it's my sincere hope to use my energy and my privilege to dismantle some of the harmful narratives and structures and barriers that exist in the world of diabetes care and services, and really be in support of the Indigenous leaders that are creating and taking the path forward through those spaces. So we've got lots to cover together today. So next I'm going to pass it back over to Jeevan for a quick interactive activity to get us started.
Perfect, thanks Tessie. And I see that lots of folks are trickling in. Feel free to just type into chat, introduce yourself and let us know where you guys are calling in from. Like Tessie said, we're going to start off with an interactive activity. So it's just going to be annotating the screen. For those of you who might not know, it's just where I'm sharing my screen. If you hover on top of view options and click the drop down menu, there'll be an annotate button on the third slide, on the third button, and then you guys have options of text and format. So we are going to start off by asking everybody today on the line, what supports wellness? So I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to just annotate the screen. Family, yes, very true. Being in nature, 100%. I really am missing some of that sunny weather. I really hope we get it soon. Nature, yes. Being safe, education, access to care, safety, trust, community connections, yes, very important. Access to safe open space, there seems to be a trend in some of these for sure. Social connections, yeah. Time for rest, yeah. Metabolic health and lifestyle. Lifestyle is incredibly important. Perfect. Awesome. So we will remove some of these annotations in a couple of seconds, but you guys can keep them coming until then. And I just want to thank you guys for being a part of this activity, and we will get to it a little bit later in the presentation. Self-determination. Thank you. That is very important. It's a very important topic for today. I'm going to pass it back to Tessie and Val.
Sure, I won't spend too much time here. We just want to quickly read through our objectives for today, our time together. So Val and I really hope to summarize the relationship between colonialism, which is ongoing, and Indigenous determinants of health, looking at that upon the rates and severity and experiences of type 2 diabetes. We hope to cover what self-determination represents and can look like at the individual, community, and systems levels. We would like to provide some examples of Indigenous self-determination and stories that we're a part of or have heard, and end with some calls to action for each of you, regardless of what level the system you work within, things to consider to support increased equity within diabetes care and services. So we have an ambitious amount of material to share. So I'm going to pass it over to Val to get us started on looking at some of the historical context. Over to you, Val.
Thank you, Tess. I just wanted to express that when I first started working on this in this area, I really started to see that that there are really in a lot of the health organizations, that because there are First Nation health workers and there is non-health First Nation health workers. And so it's really about establishing a context. One is that I am First Nation, a woman. I live on reserve, and I have volunteered in many areas, like in health, in our health clinic, in planning community development events. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you today in terms of self-determination and equity in diabetes is that we have to look at these two things. One is the historical traumas and the intergenerational traumas. When I spoke with different people, non-First Nations, asking health workers what they thought was the barriers or the challenges. And of course, history always comes up and the traumas. But for myself, as working on genealogy and where we're at with our family tree, I can see as a community member in my family that has diabetes in my family and in the community that we need to develop organizational, regional, local strategies for addressing, like Mary Ellen Turpel reported on, the racism and the cultural ethical policies that are the barriers, challenges for us in healthcare. But what I wanted to look at was the history, the more current history for now, in that this here is a picture of my grandmother. She's about 15 or 16 there, and still living in that context of living sustainably, holistically, and you know what she's doing there, of course, is like drying fish and all the activities that are seasonal in their harvesting. And so in my work and research that I've been doing, I saw this picture as a life that was very different in her days of hunting, fishing, and harvesting, and where, you know, there was no Walmart or no Whole Foods. You know, you can see in this picture that my grandmother was living in a more simpler time. They didn't perceive themselves as poor. That's one thing that, like this common theme of this, there was an abundance of food, and their home, their communal living, and their family was in the context of community, and where they were in their community. So when I thought about our lives in that more current historical context, I thought that going back and eating the foods that represent our own values, rather than the pyramid that I know that has even been kind of discounted as well socially, but with our traditional values of respect for the land and our food, and the reciprocity by giving back, and the relevancy of how the food is not just nurturing to ourselves, but families and community through our feasting, and the responsibility to look after those foods that sustain us. And that has been very hard, considering that the federal government has made, rules against harvesting areas and really not relevant to our needs. So in our teachings, we say only take what you need. And we share especially with our elders. And then we take care of what you have. And we take time to honor the water and the food, and like through first fish ceremonies. And another very precious way of teaching is taking care of one another. And so we already had, in the context of historically our own, you would say, our own social way of being, that in the Sinchothan language is called the Shtalangan, and Hakaminam, it's Nuayat. These are the guiding principles and teachings of that's the way of life. It's not like a program or a project, or but it's a way of living. And so that's what I'm looking at when I look at this picture, that we already had that in the beginning. And we had our own in our net. I think when we, as far as public health, we need to approach that respect for traditional ecological knowledge, and as well as in the academy and our tribal sovereignty, to promote healthier environments that resonate in our Indigenous communities. And when I hear, when I speak to other researchers and teachers, I hear a perspective that is totally unrelated to my own lived experiences and the experiences of my extended families and communities. So it's, that need to get back to that. When our people come together, we come together like in banners of support for local, our traditions, our protocols, and our traditional ways that are rooted in shared values, and preparing ourselves for renewal through our traditional protocols, our seasonal ceremonies. Like just recently, we gave traditional names to my great-grandchildren and my son, and we still have rites of passage, and that is possibly different from family to family, because each family has a teaching that they follow in their own, I guess, circle, you would say. So when we come together, it is really about renewal and about reclaiming our traditions. And it's like out with the old and in with the new. That's what I get when we come together. And so the next slide that I have is still of my grandmother, but shows how our systems have changed and the transitions that were made. Like in the other picture, she was about 14 or 15, and we don't really know because they didn't have birth certificates then. It was so long ago. And the here she's about 15 or 16, and her husband is a lot older than her because there were still arranged marriages. And you can see these two their children. They had 7 children, and some of them have passed away from diabetes as well. But the idea that historically that the Europeans or the settlers brought diseases that not just assaulted our land, like taking over the land and replacing their standards or their government with theirs, and and then bringing the diseases that just assaulted our social economic structures, that changed the laws. It's the whole breakdown of the family that, you know, my grandmother was 96 when she passed away. And it was like a whole different world that she grew up in at, you know, considering at that age. And so that history is in a more current trends when things were changing for the worst. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Tess, right now? Or can I go on? The next slide. So I would say that there are two layers of history that really impacted our lives. The old history that I differentiate between the intergenerational complex traumas by the residential schools and, you know, all of the 60s scoop and all the different laws that changed, but mainly the loss of language and culture that has, you know, been linked to those intergenerational traumas, and gestational diabetes as well. Before my mother, there was no such thing as gestational diabetes, and she ended up having 7 kids, and 2 were stillborn, and the rest of us, we were over 10-pound babies. And it's like they said they had no, you know, nothing to address, science to address gestational diabetes. And of course today has led to present generations of really high risk cases. So before the 1500s, Aboriginal societies and in the Americas and societies in Europe were totally separate social paths. They were really ignorant of each other. They didn't know about each other. The current history of our social and economic conditions, you know, that sought through legislation to eliminate Indian people, but by confronting these colonial narratives, even within the healthcare system, that in reality that non-First Nation workers must acknowledge and reverse assimilationist policies and systemic racism, that it's really spelled out in terms of how Canada even sought to rid Canada of the Indian problem. And, you know, the layers of how it impacted our communities across the board, across all Indigenous peoples, but across multi-layers of even to the present day of our social economic conditions around housing, around water, access to clean water is still, that's a prevalent, you know, barrier to our health and wellness. So, you know, the first known contact between Europeans and Indigenous peoples in the territories, now in the Arctic and Newfoundland, the first contact on the West Coast and the prairies didn't really occur until the 17th century. But a part of knowing the earlier history, the history is what I kind of joke about, because in 1493, it's like the church and the state started working together to eliminate and there was an overlap of power, and with them, and they presented the papal bull Inter Cetera, the doctrine of discovery, that the reason why I feel it's important to remember that is that it seems to be embedded in all systems and organizations, that somehow there is some right, inalienable right, or unseen right that non-First Nations people have, that gives them the right to make these laws over First Nations people. But in reality, in those times, the newcomers wouldn't have survived without, and even in their businesses of fishing and whaling, fur trading, you know, or even the wars that they created, it's like they wouldn't have survived if it weren't for First Nations people. So the accounts of early contact emphasizing this there is like this emphasis that they discovered or developed through exploration, whatever, from Europe. This country of Canada is just a one-sided view that, in fact, that Europeans that brought infectious diseases to the Americas and into our communities, as such as smallpox and measles and yellow fever. So that in the 1600s, the early explorers, French explorers, missionaries, colonists began to arrive in Eastern Canada, creating settlements and setting up missions for spreading their religion, that they charted what was to them a new land. And but Indigenous people began to be seen as, you know, barriers to their own progress instead of valued partners. And that's just prevalent in the in 1857 in the Gradual Civilization Act, by the British colonial government, declared that Indigenous people who were sufficiently advanced with advanced education wise or capable of managing their own affairs would be enfranchised. You know, they encouraged them so that they would relinquish their own rights as people to become British citizens. So that there, you know, there were other, you know, after that, treaties that created space for the settlers to come and to set up their own, you know, way of life and languages here. But it's by the 1867 BNA Act that created, I guess, established that within the federal government, that right to basically own us. So even though we had, you know, thriving and complex, sophisticated communities, it was really torn apart by the colonial violence and through legislation and policies, but earlier by the doctrine of discovery, that it really embedded into, I would say, even to today, the mentality that we still belong to their laws when we had our own laws. So from the diabetes aspect, maybe I'll turn it over to Tess. So in this this slide, to talk a little bit more about Indigenous populations and diabetes.
Sure. Thank you, Val, and thank you for that incredibly nuanced and layered overview of the history. I could listen to you forever, basically. So thank you for taking us through both your family stories as well as really the major forces that have led to where we are today in this present day context. Just as a snapshot, we've added here some of the stats in terms of we know and we can see that Indigenous populations in Canada experience disproportionately high rates of diabetes. So you can see that it's around 5% in the non-Indigenous populations and over double in First Nations populations living off reserve and 3 to 4 times higher in the First Nations populations living on reserve. And this is also, we see lower ages of incidence among Indigenous peoples in late teens or in their 20s. So getting diabetes earlier, which we know can lead to challenges in managing if it's undiagnosed at that early stage, as well as, they have with time, greater risk of complications over their lifetime. And we are seeing high rates of damage from diabetes. So what we know is the micro and macrovascular damage, like kidney disease requiring dialysis and lower limb amputations, are experienced at much higher rates among Indigenous populations. And so with this being our present day, it's shocking and it's disturbing. But sadly, it's not that surprising to people, and we really need to be surprised because we need to be moved into action by this situation. Like this cannot just be an acceptable state without alarm. And each of us in all areas of diabetes care have a role to play in addressing this, both to reduce the incidence of diabetes and also to improve the experiences and outcomes for people that are living with diabetes. And we need to also challenge the notion that this is just an inevitable situation, because it's not, and change is needed to create a turn in the path. And on that note, there are many inspiring examples of programs and initiatives that are emerging and advancing currently, both in community levels as well as collaborative research efforts to transform diabetes care and approaches. And Val and I are going to share some more examples of that later. I'll hand it over if you wanted to share anything about sort of current present day access to services, Val.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I wanted to say that one of the reasons why I became involved with this research, I mentioned earlier about the language and linguistics piece, and it really grew into understanding how our language works, and with that it is embedded in the land, the structures themselves, and it's embedded in our stories, the oral histories. And so when there are barriers that I found because of chronic illnesses, especially diabetes, and in my family, it was something that I had already began to think through in terms of, I saw the two pictures of my brother and sister that died from complications of gestational diabetes. I found it kind of odd that my mother would have pictures of them in their little coffins, but it's something that's, drilled in my mind, exactly a question that I always had, that how, and then my mother passed away when she was really young, like in her 50s, 56, from complications of diabetes, and that's just way too young. And so that was already something that I was looking at in terms of why couldn't she be treated, or why was this a disease that people were not able to overcome. And so my dad had started treating her. He was knew a lot about herbal medicine, traditional medicines, and I think it prolonged her life as far as her kidneys were concerned. But all of the stories, like for myself and my community, of all the people that I've known that are relatives, including my two brothers that passed away, an older brother and younger brother. So the older brother, he had been to treatment and came home, and he was okay for a while, and then he fell back into alcoholism and just really became not able, like, to have, I would say, the will to find a way to get out of what he had, this cycle, not just of the addictions and the alcoholism, but the violence that went along with it, and all of those social determinants that I hear about. It's more like, what could have been done to treat for him, but it's the treatment, you know, that at the time it was just a treatment center, and they talked a bit on nutrition, about living a good life or whatever. So then anyway, he lost his life through alcoholism, but he was also diabetic. And then my younger brother, he had more I would say my brother was a hunter, he was a fisherman, he was all of those things that we were still practicing in our community. But my younger brother, his life by that time changed, where, you know, there was like junk food, McDonald's, all that stuff, that all the things that are so addictive, right, and easy, whatever. And but you know, he was so afraid of losing his limbs that he went to treatment as well, but there was still something missing more, because even to get into treatment was a barrier, because of the you know, having to go see a counselor and having all the paperwork, and then if there was a bed on time in between, and you have to be sober for a certain amount of time. But in the meantime, he would give up and just get drunk again. So, but the thing is that he got involved with drugs as well, very heavy duty drugs, so that his, you know, I really tried to support him, and we did kind of nutritional research, and we went, he was very as well good at herbal medicines, traditional medicines, and where to go. But he was so stuck and in that cycle of that cravings, and whatever happens biologically when the you know, when you have your blood sugar levels. So when I started contacting our health clinic, there was no really response to what they were actually offering, except for they had a counselor, they had a home care nurse, but then the home care nurse, one to service our how many communities that are under that one this area, so that, you know, there was no one to reach out to. And when we were able to, it was at the end of his life that he was just drinking, and I couldn't help him. I was there trying to help him with his wound care and all of that. And then one weekend came that it was a long weekend, and there was the home care nurse had finally come to see him after 7 months. So there was no way of really tracking that he was a high risk. So the nurses came, and they said, well, it's a long weekend, so we won't be able to come now until after. But meanwhile, on that Sunday and Monday, Sunday, I couldn't make it to see my brother, and he was already in the last parts of his life. And I think if I had been there, you know, I could have at least brought him to emergency or something. But anyway, by Monday, I was coming home after getting supplies to go and see him, and the police were there, and that was it. You know, he was outside his house. And so, and then the home care nurse came the next day. So I would say that there is a big, huge gap in services somewhere that are at so many levels. So since that time, and then now my older sister who lived with him, instead of kind of like, she kind of just stayed to her diet that she was doing, which wasn't healthy either, but as healthy. But now she kind of understands how strong those cravings are, that when your blood sugar level's so out of whack, but she doesn't, the only thing really that she has going for is that she doesn't drink alcohol. So it has been my mission since then to find ways, and my other relatives that have passed away, to find a way that we can start to turn this around. And it is in one way complex, but on the other hand, when we look at our traditional models and our how we looked after each other, and the foods we ate, and it's going to take a very good communication between how the services are accessed. And my whole thing was when I first started working with the health programs, I said, well, why don't you have a tracking system? Why isn't there anything in place to work with these diabetic patients? And so I started looking at some of the resources in our communities, in our own backyard. What we have a certified professional recreation type person that has diabetes training as well, and she's willing to work with any morbidly obese age, across ages, to take those steps towards becoming a stronger, healthier. And so we have in our community resources, but it's the policies and all of the funding just doesn't match up to the needs. And also added the racist tone and talk that we get some at times when we do go to the clinic, and some of that's from even our own people, and it's like kind of crazy making. And I always call that that dysfunction, where we begin to believe that we are assimilated into those rules and policies. We're not. We have the, I guess you would say, our own guiding principles, our laws, our stilling and our way of life. That we have family laws, we have ceremonial laws, we have teachings around harvesting. It's all there, but we have to come back, and that's where the language is so important, in that those harvesting places and types of harvesting, and how to make the medicines, and it's all still there, but it's we have to be able to pass it on. So that's one reason why language is so important in this. And of course it's critical now because of the climate change. We had flooding here that was just like shoulder deep, that we've never seen before. And so did our health coordinator have a plan, an emergency plan? No, because our leadership, if we're basing it on chief and council, and they don't have that expertise, they have to find outside people that will come in. And of course, for us, the Army came in to help us when it flooded. That's how critical that it had gotten. So with the diabetes, and I believe the best of science is there, and the best of traditional ecological science is there as well, that can become a framework for being innovative and being creative and being asking the right questions with the right people. And we have to meet at that intersection where we have to name what it is that are the barriers, and not be afraid to say it to the people that are in charge of those funds, that are in charge of the programming. And what we see in my community, especially because our health clinic, I'm on Vancouver Island on the west coast, right, eastern side, and our little clinic is on a smaller island that you have to take a ferry to and they'll only see us once a week. And if we can't get in, well, you know, because of ferry fare or because you're too sick to make it over there, you know, there's every community has its own challenges. So there's locally, but every community has their own strengths as well. And that, to me, that's where, when we're reframing, we're rewriting, and we're renewing our and transforming our programming, that it has to take into consideration the trauma-informed based work, people that will do outreach or wellness checks on people that are high risk, especially with diabetes, and that there are no judgments on them. Because I know that's a part of what my younger brother went through, is that he was on council at one time, and he was actually a minister at one time, and the shame that he felt was overwhelming. So we have to come at it at a way that our teachings are to look after one another and to share with one another, so that we can regain that foundation in who we are. So the programming that we are working on, Tess, do you have anything to well, actually,
I think you've covered a lot of sort of the present and sort of looking towards the future. And I'm wondering, just in the interest of time, I will move on to sort of the self-determination pieces.
Yeah.
And go through the individual, community, and systems level. And if yeah, we'll see where we're at for time after that. So go ahead,
okay.
Val.
So so having been such a nosy person trying to find out what was going on with the programming in our communities, not just my community, but I started seeing all the other needs of all the other communities. And I had been on our SFU website and found out that there was a research call out for researcher for Indigenous diabetes. And I went, yay, I found a spot. And, you know, to begin to, I'm working with 9 South Vancouver Island communities that share common language and ancestral knowledge in this Shilling. And so they have pulled together a project, a very small project, but it's I always say it has a really big meaning, because it's looking at the foundation of where we need to start walking together with and not being like this wall between us, between First Nations health, island health, public health. It's like we're all walking together in the same direction. And that's what the project is. So that's what they named the project. And that name came from the community, because they really do have strengths in their community and are willing to co-develop a culturally rooted model that will enhance the culture and resilience that is already present within the communities, so that we can bridge those gaps. And the one question that they said to themselves, the health direct clinics there, they said, how can we be who we are as First Nations people while integrating our traditional knowledge with the best Western approaches to diabetes care? Mm-hmm. So how can we be First Nations and still use what's in place already? And so we're finding the gaps in each area, in each community, because out of the 9 communities, there's only one that is accessed or hooked up with the island health networking. that networks with all chronic diseases and helps individuals either with phone calls or text messages or rides to their appointments. There's all sorts of resources that these patients can find through that network, and yet out of the 9 there's only 1 that's connected to that. And so if it's a matter of assessing and surveys to find out where those 9 communities are at and create this analysis of the needs of each community, I think that we're going to find that out of this little project is going to be a springboard to even Red Cap is the research, what is it, test, it's education and data collection
systems.
yeah
Mm-hmm.
yeah so there is a way to track and to follow a diabetes client or patient where they are they can be connected to those services. And also to, you could even, like, it's an application or a tool to help people to kind of monitor where they're at individually, family, community. And so each clinic that they can share that information through the PHN, the health numbers, so that they're tracked all across the board. And so this little project that we have going here is a way to I would say, to springboard some of these the strengths that are already in the communities that are there. So it's really looking at the best from traditional and modern science and making referrals, wraparound services, whatever it is that will take for our First Nations people to reclaim their health and wellness. And, you know, I'm on that journey as well. So it's time. And, you know, where we're at right now is that our young people are suffering as well from these. So we're going to have to begin to build on these, you know, I'm sure across the board and, you know, across Canada, people, even the US are working on this, on health and wellness, and that our voice has to be heard in this. So, and I'm sure there are models of people that are working on that as well. And so I just want to thank everybody that came and to listen, and for Tess for helping me to gain that voice. That's walking together, right? That's communicating across the board, like who we are. I'm a community member. You know, I have just those lived experiences with my family, you know, and it's where I'm at. If my education leads in that direction, that's who I am in terms of giving back to my own community. So is there, do you want to go to the future, those other projects?
Sure. You just provide such wonderful examples of self-determination in action. And I really appreciate you giving us a better understanding of the Walking Together in the Same Direction project. And you mentioned a few times about the youth. And so I wanted to, we did have this example of the Indigenous Youth Mentorship Program to share as well, which is a wonderful program that's resiliency and relationship based. And it's an after school healthy living program that started in Manitoba and has since also been really successful in Alberta. And they pair up Indigenous high school students with elementary school children in a mentorship model and promote holistic wellness and positive mental health and those cultural connections that you talk about that are such protective factors against type 2 diabetes. And it's really grounded in this circle of courage that you see here with the values of generosity and belonging and mastery and independence, and builds on the strengths and talents of the youth. So it's really creating the conditions for self-determination and empowerment that you've been talking about.
Yeah.
As well as this example also from Vancouver Island, where the Walking Together in the Same Direction engagement is underway, the Tichacho Getting Well Again from the New Chalmers communities. And this program, they're really bridging in traditional knowledge as shared by the elders and the knowledge keepers with the food sovereignty activities and the diabetes prevention and management services. So taking that holistic approach and is a great example of community self-determination that then supports the individual members on their own wellness journey and looks to inspire like systems change at the greater level. And in the interest of time, we won't be able to go through the different layers of self-determination, but all participants, we will be sending you, or you will be able to see the slides with our points online at the council's website, where we talk about the individual and the community and the systems levels of self-determination. But I believe that Val, through your stories and your examples, have really covered these points in terms of redistributing decision-making and looking at partnerships and how can organizations be in support of communities that are developing their own directions, or as you said, just really embracing their way of living. It's not a program, it's not a project, it's a way of living. So I think the last one of the last things is we wanted to loop back, Val, to what folks had put forward earlier in terms of all of those things that support wellness. We talked about family and access to land and access to space and social connections and balance, and like these are the things that support our health. And when we look at what you've said about the process and the ongoing legacy of colonization, these were all targeted. And for Indigenous peoples, getting back to that way of living that you've described so passionately and eloquently and powerfully is really the work. It's really how in each of our spheres of influence can we support self-determination, whether we're working one-on-one with someone, how do we help them develop their care plan that's based in their values and includes the people that they want to be in their support system. And if it's at a program development or a policy or government level, we each have a role to play to support wellness through our actions.
Yeah, it's just, you know, identifying cultural, even healthcare workers need to identify the cultural aspect, like in language revitalization, we have language champions, we have mentors, and we have media campaigns, and we promote the language through foods and harvesting medicines, medicine circle or talking circles and camps. And so it depends on how you want to go about it. And really I call it sensory wellness, in that we aim to listen with our hearts and to speak with open minds and to feel what our ancestors felt in what it must have been like to be in that when everything was going down, and how meaningful it was to them is how meaningful we have to go forward. So with that, thank you, Tess, for letting me come to this webinar to talk to everyone.
Our pleasure, and it's been an honor to have you and to hear you share your perspectives and stories. So Val, a huge thank you to you. And I see we had developed some calls to action, which again will be shared on the council's website. So we encourage you to read through and to reflect and to think about how can you in your own personal and work life respond to these and promote self-determination and equity in diabetes. So I'll pass it back over to Jeevan to close out our session today.
Awesome. Thank you, Tessie and Valerie, for an amazing session. I know that we are close to the end, but we did have one question that perhaps we can quickly address. It was mentioned that the IDHC model looked very promising. Is there any similar interest or possible projects in other parts of BC?
A great question. In terms of this exact model, I haven't seen it expand into BC. I know that there are a lot of amazing programs involving youth that are also, considered protected. Like I think of even where I was previously living on Haida territory, there are amazing food sovereignty programs that engage children through their school to do traditional food activities, develop mentorship, and connect with culture and traditional teachings. So it's not exactly this Indigenous Youth Mentorship Program, but other really inspiring activities where kids are learning about traditional food systems and knowledge, which we know are preventive factors in the same way as the mentorship program.
Awesome. Thank you, Tessie. So that is all for today. And thank you for everybody for participating and being present. And I see that a lot of you guys are filling out the evaluation poll that we have up. So thank you. That really helps us plan these amazing sessions with inspiring speakers like Valerie and Tessie. I just want to thank you once again for your guys' time and energy, the amount of effort that was put into these slides. Like we said, they are going to be uploaded onto the website, and if this is recorded, so we'll have everything uploaded on the website soon for you guys all. But thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you guys at the next webinar. Take care, everyone.